OK, on va commencer, je pense.
We're going to begin. Will introduce myself first. My name is Jessica Legault. I am a co-coordinator for the Birth Planning Center in Quebec, and I am in charge of the sexual education project, and I will be facilitating the panel today, and I'm very happy to be here today, and I thank you very much for being here with us. So just a little bit of housekeeping. For interpretation between English and French, the panel will mostly be happening in French today, but there is interpretation available in the bottom of your screen at the bottom on the right corner. There is a globe. You can click on it and choose the language you want. We also have Quebec Sign Language interpreters. We have Monique right now, who is on screen right now, but there is another interpreter that will take over. They will take turns. A few things to keep in mind for today. We have the chat to interact between each other, but we also have a Q&A section. So I will try to accumulate questions in the presentation, and then at the end I will have a Q&A moment where I will look at the Q&A section and answer all those questions together. So please don't be shy to ask questions, but I will be saving those for the end. If you need to have presentations, if you want to have the versions of the presentations that we'll be showing on the screen, we will be showing the French version, but if ever you need the English version of the PowerPoint presentation, please write to Michelle. Michelle, can you put your email, or maybe it will just be in the chat. So just make sure you let Michelle know that you would like the English version. Then we will have Awa, who will be the stewardess of our feelings today. So I will
Bonjour.
let her speak.
Donc
Hello.
oui, moi, mon prénom, c'est Awa.
My name is Awa.
Mes pronoms en anglais
My
sont
pronouns
they,
in
them.
English are they and
Et
them.
En français,
And in
c'est
French,
elle ou yel.
it is elle or
Aujourd'hui, mon rôle,
yel.
ça va être d'être
Today,
vraiment
my
comme ce qu'on
role
appelle gardien ou
will
gardienne du
be
senti.
what we call
Mon rôle principalement, c'est de veiller à ce
steward of
que
feelings.
tout se
My
déroule
role
bien
is
tout au
to
long de
make sure that
l'événement et
everything goes well throughout the event,
veiller au maintien des
and to
pratiques
make sure
anti-oppressives.
that
Donc, pour
anti-oppressive
cela, je
practices
documente
are
tout au long
maintained.
de
So in
l'événement
this
toutes les remarques qui sont
goal,
faites et tous les
during the
commentaires que je
entire
reçois
event, I will
en
keep
live. Puis,
I will
je reste aussi
keep note of
disponible
the
72 heures
comments,
après l'événement
and
s'il y a
I'm
quelque chose sur lequel vous
also
voulez revenir.
available
Ou si vous avez
72
des
hours
questions,
after the event if ever you have
je peux y
something
répondre
you'd like
et
to go
je
back
vais
over.
écrire
If
mon
you have
adresse email
questions, I can answer
dans
to
la
your questions,
conversation
and I will
pour que
also
tout le
put
monde
my
puisse
email
la
in the
voir. Puis,
chat so that
il me semble
everyone
aussi
can
que
contact
vous
me.
pouvez y avoir accès
Also, you may have
via les
access
courriels que
to
les
my
organisateurs et
coordinates through the
organisatrices de
email
l'événement
that
vous ont
the
déjà fourni.
organizers
Merci
have already
beaucoup.
sent you. Thank you so much.
Merci, Hawa. Merci d'être là. Donc, je vais procéder avec notre reconnaissance territoriale. Nous tenons d'abord à souligner que les terres sur lesquelles sont situées les personnes animatrices aujourd'hui de ce panel font partie du territoire traditionnel non
So we would like to recognize that we are on the Kanyanyagaga unceded territories that have long been a place of exchange between nations. The movement of schools without violence recognizes this territory and recognizes the scope of its work on the entire territories that is today known as Quebec. The movement as community organizations related to healthy relationships, sexuality, gender, and sexual orientations wants to recognize the oppression and the subjectivity for spiritual, wants to recognize the special way in which gender is recognized in Inuit and indigenous cultures. We want to be anti-racism, anti-normativity, and we also wish to recognize that the activities for preventions and fighting against sexual violence take place in scholar establishments where the educative system is influenced by the colonialist heritage, notably for, and has had an oppressive effect on the communities. And we want to make sure that people take the time to learn the histories of the indigenous traditional territories where they are. Michelle will add a link in the chat where you can learn which territory was traditionally the place where you are standing today. Thank you. I will now ask Kita to introduce herself and to introduce Building the Field. Hello, everybody. My name is Kita Mercer. My name is, I use the pronouns she and they. And I am here today from Toronto, which is Mississauga, Credit, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Weda territories. It's my great pleasure to be here today to introduce the foundation and our work on this project. This project has a part in Quebec, but is also part of a broader project on which we've been working for several years. We have received some funding from the Public Health Canada to fight and prevent violence, gender-based violence. And this is a 5-year project that launched in 2019 and will keep on going until 2024. The goal of this project is to support programs that help young youth to adopt strategies that allow them to establish and maintain healthy relationships, to prevent gender-based violence, and also to make a change on the collective and societal levels on how we experience violence, gender-based violence. So this network in Quebec is one of the 3 networks with which we've been working which we will be working for the next 5 years of this project. We also have an indigenous network that is pan-Canadian and that works with indigenous youth to work about healthy relationships and gender-based violence, and this is in partnership with NAFC, the National Association of Friendship Centers, and we also work with 4 young facilitators. In a few months, we will launch a network in the Atlantic region, which will also have the same vocation to prevent gender-based violence, but also the promotion of healthy relationships and the supporting of ground work in the Atlantic provinces. But we don't know exactly what it will look like because this work hasn't started yet. But just like the network in Quebec and like the Pan-Canadian Indigenous Network, we think it will establish their activities together. So if you have any questions on this network in total or about other networks, please don't hesitate to contact me. I will put in my email in the chat. And thank you to be here today, for being here today. Now I will invite Mélanie Lemay to speak about the movement. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. So the movement for sexual violence-free schools came up in 2018 in Saint-Michel, and it was a collectivity of Haitian that spoke up to try to prevent sexual-based violence in schools. There is a specific and uniform process to fight sexual violence in school institutions. We want to make sure that schools have the necessary tools and skill sets to face sexual violence and to respond with youth. The movement tries to make sure everything is in place so that there is a positive, inclusive, uh, empowering access to sexual education. This is why the movement against sexual violence in schools wishes to put pressure on the political system as well, to also try to promote healthy relationships for youth and to organize national activities for the promotion of healthy relationships. The movement, of course, is intersectional, or chooses an intersectional approach. It's important to keep in mind that the sexual violences are not only gender-based, but also based in racism, transphobia, and colonial heritage. So we want to offer resources to survivors and take into account all the dimensions to make sure to avoid all forms of exclusion. The movement also recognizes that the activities for prevention take places in scholar institutions where there are also problematics that are influenced by the colonialist system in these institutions, particularly in the Inuit Nation of Quebec and the indigenous nations of Quebec. We have received important financing over 5 years that will help us support our objectives and mandates. The members have there were 10 committees, and they've each come together to take decisions. There is one committee that has a political profile for specific and uniform intervention in school systems. We think specifically of what has been done in our movement regarding the the 1051 bill project. There's also another committee that is organizing activities at the national level for sense of awareness and training to try to promote healthy relationships for youth. We also have another committee that wants to focus on training. For the first year of the project, we have suggested to create a platform or a resource get that would gather together all the workshops offered by community organizations for promotion of healthy relationships for youth. And this would be available all throughout Quebec. I thank you for your attention, and I will let Jess take the mic.
Thanks, Mélanie. We're now going to start the panel.
We will now start the panel.
The objective of this panel is to look at prevention of sexual violence in schools. The team, when preparing for today, looked at offering a platform to groups who are involved in sexual violence prevention and who focus on intersectionality in their work, whether it's through anti-racism, through inclusive narratives of the experiences of people living sexual violences, or through making visible issues connected to disability. The participants and the groups of today's panel
the interventions
work against sexual violence in an inclusive and intersectional way. We want to take this opportunity to invite the participants, the audience members, to reflect on a few questions about
your own program,
their own intervention programs. So what are the dead angles of your programs?
Who is your
program conceived for? And which populations or issues are neglected?
Or which issue is forgotten?
Do I take part in the invisibilization of certain communities? do I only work with
or putting in
privileged
the blind spot some groups,
populations?
how
And
can
how
I
could I broaden
the
my
scope of
field
my
of
program?
intervention?
So at the end, we will come back.
So we're going to come
What
back at
is your
the
call
end
to
to these
action? What have
questions and
you taken
ask
from this
you
presentation?
what
And we
comes
will
out of this presentation for you.
gather all the ideas
First
together.
of all,
So
we will start with the National Institute for Equity, Inclusion and Equality. I'm going to introduce the panel members, Maud Mascotte, the communication agent at the regroupement des organismes spécialisés en emploi pour les personnes handicapées. She's a coordinator of the National Institute for Equity, Equality and Inclusion of people living with a disability. She advocates for accessible housing and the rights and interests of people living with a handicap. She is part of 7 boards. She is also a spokesperson for many organizations. Maud is also co-founder of Directrices Sans Limites, an organization that offers activities to young people who live with or without a disability. Madame Selma Quizri, ED and co-founder of the Institute for Equity, Equality, and Inclusion of People Living with a Disability. She is an activist and works for improving the situation of women and girls living with disabilities. She works in advocacy against violence, discrimination, empowerment through access to the workforce, and she works for an equal access to health and social services. She recognizes that the participation to everyone to the improvements of the living conditions of people living with a disability is an essential part of our society. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. Thanks for having us. Myself and my colleague Maud, we will present you today our organization. It's a very new organization, but we will also introduce the initiative that we've launched with the support of the Foundation for the Greater Montreal and the financial support of wage at the federal level. So those 2 financial supports have allowed us to launch this initiative. And I work on projects that fight for the elimination of violences and discriminations. So our project aims to take action against gender-based violence towards girls and women with disabilities. It's an awareness-raising project. It was launched in January 2020. We'll come back to it soon to tell you how it was designed, why it was created, and how it was launched. We also have a note. You will use the term disability during this presentation, and it's important for us to make it clear that we do refer to social reality rather than a medicalizing or pathologizing use of the term. And that's very important because in English, handicap and disability is a term that has a very negative connotation, but in French, it doesn't carry that weight. So we always have to be very conscious and mindful of the terms that we use. It's another step. We also have workshops and trainings on this. So this note is quite important for us. We really want to insist on the dignity and the participation, the full participation of people living with disabilities. Let me introduce our institute. It was created in 2018 with a team of collaborators and people who work in this field, who have been working in this field for more than 30 years. Our institute offers programs and services that are quite innovative, and we work to eliminate all forms of violence and discrimination against persons with disabilities of all ages, genders, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. The Institute also actively helps promote equity to ensure all persons are equal and included in so the inclusion of all people, because it's not sufficient to say that we have an inclusive society, we also have to prove it through our actions. The approach that we favor is an intersectional analysis framework. So gender-based analysis plus, or and other terms are also used for this analysis. Combined with the human development model of the disability production process, it's an approach that was developed here in Quebec. And the people who developed this have worked for the past 40 years to introduce the notion of disability and social participation of handicapped people living with a disability. So we use definitions used by HMO and the UN to understand and create an international convention for the rights of people with disabilities. So that's our other partner, so the HDMDCP, whose approach we use to make sure we meet very specific objective and to represent people living with disabilities. Of course, we consider differences in abilities and multiple disabilities. Those are terms that we often use: abilities, disabilities, multiple disabilities. So one person living with disabilities can certainly live with, for example, like myself, eyesight disability, but also mental health problems. And it's important to take into account the person as a whole. And the person is not the obstacle, the barrier. Her disability is not the barrier, it's the environment and the attitudes that are directed towards the person that are the obstacle, the barriers. That's our approach. It's a unique support for persons with disabilities and their families. We work on accompanying, supporting, and preventing. And so we work a lot on prevention. We do rights promotion, defense, and advocacy. And we also offer trainings, education, and information. So with the persons with disabilities themselves, their surroundings, their families, but as well with the organizations that work with the public in general, or that work with people with disabilities to introduce this intersectionality notion into their work to help them understand the realities of the women, the girls, and people of all genders who live with disabilities. So the next slide, please. This is a statistic that I want to present. I'm not here to give you numbers because we don't have a lot of data, and it's part of the problem. Research with women with disabilities are not included in many of the researches that are conducted, and it prevents us from implementing programs for that population. So this is a study that's interesting, and it says that 40% to 70% of women with intellectual disabilities will experience sexual assault before the age of 18. And 82% of them will experience sexual violence over their lifetimes. Here in Quebec, there's a study that was quite secret. It was conducted by the Health and Social Services Ministry, a department. Often those studies are conducted in institutions and are not offered to the public in general. And we found that 4 girls out of 5 living with intellectual disability will experience sexual assault before the age of 18 and might continue experiencing sexual assault for all of their lives. And for boys, the numbers are similar, and it's important to understand these reality and to act upon them to better understand the impact of those violences on the persons, and to start right away from the start with prevention work. So from a very young age to do prevention work with the people and their parents. It's very important to understand because unfortunately statistics allow programs to exist. Our decision makers often work with statistics and numbers, but for women and girls with disabilities, their experience of violence often remains hidden and unaddressed due to the multiple barriers they face in accessing sexual and reproductive health, psychosocial, and criminal justice services. So that's Human Rights Watch. It's a dated report, but still in Quebec and Canada, the reality is still current. So to this day in Canada, this is the reality we are experiencing, and it's one of the reasons why we are developing programs and services like psychosocial accompaniment, because those programs and services are lacking in terms of supporting survivors of violence. So we don't exclusively work on sexual violence, we also work on institutional violences that people living with disabilities might experience, no matter what their age, their origin, their gender is. Next slide, Michelle. Building solidarity is ensuring safe, egalitarian, and inclusive communities. This is what we launched on the 30th of September 2020. It's a project that started truly in January 2020 in Montreal. And the aim is to speak of gender-based violences and to work in collaboration with allies, not only persons with disabilities, so it's by and for, but we also want the solutions to be carried by the population, by the collectivities. So violence can be individual, it can be experienced at the personal level, but solutions are collective. Everyone must act and participate to build inclusive and safe communities. So I like this quote from Eric Emmanuel Schmidt: solidarity is not generous, it is intelligent and interested. It sees a shared danger and a way to escape it together. Violences are a collective danger. Solidarity is a collective endeavor. We must work together to prevent this shared danger. So it's important for us today to see this solidarity in action, to see the blind spots that we might have. We are launching a dialogue that we would really like to pursue in the future. Next slide, please, Michelle. Our initiative is for and by persons with disabilities. Take action against gender-based violence towards girls and women with disabilities, raise awareness to better prevent, is the testimony and words of people living with disabilities. We did not only seek out women in general, it's really people living with disabilities, people who identify as living with disabilities. So of persons who are seeking to contribute to a sustainable solution to build safer, more egalitarian communities. It is also a chance to speak out about more harmonious and equal intimate relationships, breaking taboos and suggesting strategies and means of prevention and support that are adapted. So sexuality has often been a taboo because it is informed by biases, prejudice that we have about persons with handicap. We think they're asexual, that they cannot experience intimate relationships, but it's not true. And it's important to open people's eyes about this. So we've heard testimonies and words, whether it be from workers or from participants themselves. My colleague will say a few words about this later, but it's really important for us to open this dialogue. It's an initiative, as I was saying, by and for persons with disabilities. The main objective, which is to increase awareness and prevention of gender-based violence and its repercussions. It is also a chance to promote safe behaviors and egalitarian relationships, because we asked the question, what would be a healthy relationship, a healthy, intimate relationship? It's important because the people to whom we've asked those questions are people who don't hear the question often. And violence starts very early on at the grade school level, at the high school level. And it's important to give them the tools to accompany them, not to do things for them, but to help them, accompany them. It's about speaking out and reclaiming power, starting a solidarity movement to promote safe communities for all. For girls and women with disabilities are taking collective action to promote gender equality, healthy, intimate relationships, and equal relationships. They are contributing to social change and better understanding gender-based violence, detecting its signs and repercussions, thus allowing for early detection and promoting proper intervention. Whether it's in high schools, we think it's very important to give access. It's important to give access to sexual education and to support within the school environment. If I'm experiencing a specific reality, if my child is experiencing something, they need to have access to a counselor, a worker who does not have biases, because if the person suffers from assault, they are often judged. We often do not believe children who live with disabilities. We often think that they are making up stories. We present them as being asexual, but they do have a sexuality, and it's important to recognize that. I'm going to let Maud speak about the implementation. She was one of the participants of this initiative that we would like to broaden. So Maud, the floor is yours. Thank you, Selma. So to get into the subject, we've created an advisory committee with different members with different backgrounds to implement and put into action different activities. So produce video clips that raise awareness about equal and safe relationships. We also wanted to see both the sides of the coin, the negative aspects and the positive aspects. We also wanted to create awareness and prevention tools, which is why we decided to launch our social campaign on social media and organize a roundtable to begin reflecting on accompaniment and intervention methods that are adapted to situations of gender-based violence. Next slide, please. So here are the members of the advisory committee. They have different backgrounds.
As I've mentioned, we are from all kinds of origins.
An immigrant person,
one
a person,
immigrant person, one indigenous person, we have one person from the LGBTQ plus community who identified. So we have people hailing from all from the diversity on this committee. Now we are going to show you one of the video capsules from the panel to give you some context on the call for action we've done. We have done 3 videos. We have healthy relationships and equality relationships. So we have speaking up our stories, and we have speaking up the continuum of violences. As Sigma said earlier, we have launched on September 30th this call to action. You can see the French sign here on the screen, which we have done for the event of the September 30th, when we did a webinar to launch our societal campaign. You can also see now the same thing, but the English version of that poster. We have decided to try to reach out to as many people as possible by having the event be bilingual. I will now continue mode. Yes. So the societal campaign will stretch over 1 year in the frame of this campaign to act against violence. What we wanted was the creation of a community, of a solidarity. It's not, as I was saying earlier, the solutions cannot be individual, they have to be collective. It's nice to say you have to speak up, don't keep it inside, but still we have to have resources to make sure that we can support this person. We don't want to work only to get people out of silence. We want to make sure that they also have the support necessary to have some help. So we hope that with this initiative, we will break taboos and get a conversation started about adapted intervention and about support in your organizations, in the public and parapublic systems. It's very important to know how to raise awareness and how to prevent. There are action plans every year, every 5 years in Quebec, but all action plans against violence, all kinds of violence, whether it's sexual violence or domestic violence. Often when we talk about people living with disability, we speak mostly of women and girls as being victims, as being the most vulnerable victims. But when comes the time to put in measures, these groups disappear. We don't necessarily speak of people that are disabled. So the measures are mostly awareness in this case. What we want in this case is action. We want change. It's been 20 years we've been doing awareness. It's not enough. If we only do that within the group, it doesn't work. The whole community, the whole society has to be informed and ready to act with and for these people. So we have also created a Facebook group that is dedicated to survivors who want to share their stories and who would like to share solutions that they see. And we have put on our Facebook page and our website concrete actions that anybody can take in their own communities, whether it's in the school. What can I do? Say in a school with a lot of diversity, with people with lived experience of disability. How can I support this person? What can I do? If somebody speaks up to me, opens up to me, how can I help? If I am a person working for the school, what do I do? You know, nearly 80% of disabilities are invisible. We need to see and understand them. When we say disability, we also speak of autism. We also speak of intellectual diversity. And so it's important to get to know all the scope of disability and to share knowledge. So in some ways, the goal of this initiative is to create a collectivity to share knowledge as well. We ask a lot. We ask mostly to the people adhering to this initiative on our Facebook page or elsewhere. We ask them to take a cardboard and write down, what do you do? What are the actions you take? And so in Quebec, they're going to do this and that. In Montreal, they're going to do this and that. We would like to see what groups are doing, to work together. So being in this movement together is a step forward. It's huge for us. It's very important. And we have met other organizations that have beautiful initiatives. And our work is also to promote and support those initiatives and make sure that those initiatives are adapted to be more inclusive. And we also work with other organizations to try to find ways to better give the tools to people living with experience of disability and to the people around them, their caretakers and friends, so that everybody has the right tools. All right, Michelle, it's your turn. We'll make it through. Thelma, can we just take a tiny break because you have so much great content, but we have to let other panelists also speak. But we will get back to this later in this panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, Selma and Maud. We are now going to the next panelist. Allow me to introduce you to Misenka Stephanie. She is working at Head and Hands, and she does an initiative for sexual education in high schools with a peer-to-peer approach. Misenka wants to reach a more holistic approach to sexual education. As a Black woman, Misenka knows how important it is to create appropriated and inclusive content that will speak to everyone, and not only something standardized. As part of her work, she's also a volunteer for elementary schools. She's also a facilitator for Champagne, initiative for BIPOC to meet around a cup of bubbly wine and speak. Thank you so much, Ms. Sanka, for being here today with us. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Ms. Sanka. I use the pronouns she and her. I am a coordinator for Essence à Demain. Head and Hands is an organization, a non-profit organization in Montreal situated in NDG. We offer a variety of services for youth from 12 to 25 years old. The overall goal of our organization is to promote well-being, physical and mental well-being for youth. Our approach for all the services we offer is based on prevention, inclusivity, non-judgmental and holistic. All of our services are guided by these principles that I've mentioned. So we want to try to reduce harm. For those who are not aware of harm reduction, it is a public health approach that aims to offer people the information and support and tools that they require so that harm that could be caused by dangerous behavior can be reduced. So for youth, we try to meet them where they're at and try to help them make healthy choices and healthier choices for themselves, for who they are. And we do this because we recognize that there is not a solution that's one size fits all, and that youth need to take their decision based on all kinds of complex factors in their lives. And we want to encourage their autonomy and their dignity. And our second mission is to have an approach that is non-judgmental. We really understand that youth are the better place to take decisions about their own lives, and we want to fundamentally respect their choices. We want to make sure that they make choices that respect themselves fundamentally. So we try to remain open and receptive to all situations without bearing judgment. And the last part of our mission is education. So since our approach wants to be a harm reduction based approach and non-judgmental approach, we want to make sure that we can give information to our youth, the information so that they have the tools to make decisions that are the best for themselves. So it's very important for us to offer education that is inclusive and open, and our approach wants to be holistic, because we know that there are many factors that can influence somebody's life. And so to promote physical well-being, many things have to be met. So in this sense, we wish to remain holistic. So Head and Hands offers a health clinic where youth can come talk to a doctor, can come do some tests. Right now, this service is paused because of the pandemic, but we are also offering a service to help people to start hormonal therapy. And our last mission is to have a service that is confidential. Personally, I coordinate the SENSE project, which is the sexual education health project. It's a project that started in 2005 because at that time the government had removed sexual education from schools. So our program was born out of a reaction to this. So to try to make sure to fill the gaps and make sure that youth had access to sexual education. So that's why this project was created. Then the SENSE project became very queer and trans inclusive, and also wants to keep a distance between this program. We want to avoid centering cis and heteronormative voices. We want to make sure all voices are included and that everybody has access to sexual health education that is comfortable and approachable for everyone. So in this sense, we offer workshops that speak of all kinds of subjects that speak of sexuality or not. So we have some activities around gender, around sexuality. And right now we're having really peer-to-peer programming because our mission really reaches out to people from 12 to 25 years. And so we try to make sure that the people doing the work are capable of bonding, creating a bond with the youth they're speaking with, so that people can feel comfortable to speak with someone that is not so far from their own age and their own realities. So as I mentioned, we really want that our education decentralizes cis and heteronormative voices. And so we make sure that we have a lot of volunteers that are from the LGBTQ plus community, that are racialized people. We want to make sure that our interventions are diversified and that all people are represented for the SENSE project, and for the sexual education in general. So for today, I want to speak more specifically of the way of how we approach our work regarding sexual violence and all kinds of discrimination, specifically for youth who are queer and trans, and really speak of how we think the SENSE project is a revolution in the ways to think of our work and the voices we're centering, and how to make sure that all the voices are heard, are on the same foot, and that no one is forgotten, as is often the case for sexual education right now. So the classes are very cis-centered, very straight, so a lot of voices are forgotten. And so the work of SENSE is really to try to center the forgotten voices, and also to make it so that the youth we're working with are comfortable with their identities and comfortable to seek help when they need help, and to be comfortable to speak with people when they need to. So that's the SENSE project in general. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Sanka. So we are now going to move on to our two speakers from the Maison d'Haïti. Orlando is born in Haiti, more specifically in Degonaye. He holds a sociology master's and a certificate in pedagogics. He's a project manager for the Maison d'Haïti for an awareness and program for young boys aged 10 to 17. Monica has moved to Montreal a long time ago, but she thinks of herself as a chameleon citizen. She has studied communications, but then did a master's in creative research, and she started working in the Northeast sector. She is a project manager since October 2019 at the Maison d'Haïti. She works for cultural interchange programs in regions. Thank you very much for being here, Orlando and Monica. You may now speak. Thank you very much, Jessie, for introducing us so nicely. Let me take this occasion also to thank you for this lovely invitation for this panel about sexual violence in schools. Just to go a little faster, I'm going to present in a few minutes. La Maison d'Haïti is an organization, but what we want to talk about is about youth coordination and the program only for them, and just for them. We have one for girls and one for boys. So La Maison d'Haïti is a community organization and cultural organization that aims to educate and create links with the society. The organization wants to promote, integrate, and make living conditions better for people coming from Haiti. Based in Saint Michel neighborhood, we have many missions. You can check out our website to see more information, but as I've mentioned earlier, what we want is to try to focus on youth coordination, which has 3 programs. Just for the girls, which is a self-development program for youth from 9 to 25 years old. And then there is the Just for the Boys program, which is one that I run, which is aimed to boys from 10 to 17 years old to try to guide them throughout their teenage years and to try to help them navigate intimidation and toxic masculinity related issues. We try to deconstruct social constructs that are present in our society. We try to support boys in their psychosocial development and their emotional development through specific activities. We have a program that is specifically aimed at boys to try to support them, but also their families to reach our goals. The Boy Project, there's 2 people, Gaël, whom I say hello to. We have weekly meetings in schools and at the Maison d'Haïti, and we have a lot of recreative activities as well, sportive activities and group discussions. We speak of subjects that are masculinity, gender, sexual relationships, behavior, seduction, body, the sexual diversity, the self-acceptance, feelings, emotions, ethics, and so on. The main problems that youth in Saint Michel face, particularly those in the Maison d'Haïti, is socioeconomic exclusion associated to racism and poverty and many other problems that will lead to other issues in the neighborhood, such as sexual exploitation. 33% of the places related to sexual commerce are in Saint Michel. So youth of the Saint Michel neighborhood are really vulnerable.
There are networks that recruit. There's also a phenomenon of hypersexualizations that we can see on social media. So social media also contributes to normalize the hypersexualization and reinforce the vulnerability of those young people. So in order to find alternatives to those issues, La Maison d'Haïti and the members of the Projet GA team, Juste pour elle and Goût de Vivre, favor a participatory approach that is anchored in the idea that the young person is a person capable of understanding, of criticizing, and in being a change agent. It is thanks to their honest collaboration that we have been able to develop this project, the Young Boys Project, Projet G. In terms of recommendations, I'm going to let my colleague Monica speak about it. We did mention that the denunciation of all forms of violence in the schools have been initiated by young people in Saint-Michel, particularly girls who come to the Maison d'Haïti and who use the services there. And Monica will speak about that experience more in her presentation. I want to say a few words about the pandemic. So the pandemic and sexual violences have not disappeared during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's quite the opposite. Because of marginalization, social marginalization, and social isolation, we mustn't forget that the Saint-Michel neighborhood is the neighborhood where the young people are in situations of precarity in terms of work, of housing, and social conditions. And the pandemic is having an impact on the occurrence of sexual violence. And employment rates are going up. Youth are losing adaptation and coping strategies, and this all contributes to the increasing rates of sexual violences. So Monica, I will now let you talk into more details about the Juste pour elles project, just for them. Thank you. Great. I'm going to go fast because I think we have to go fast. We don't have a lot of time left. I don't want to go too fast for the interpreters either. Sorry. So just for them, Juste pour elles is a program for young girls. I won't repeat what Orlando said. So it's really a project for girls 10 to 17 years old. We work with the families and the girls. Maybe that's a specificity of our program. We really collaborate with the families. It's very important for us, and it influences, it's part of the dynamic and the style, the approach of La Maison d'Haïti. So what we do is we work on issues related to sexuality and with poverty and the complex reality of the neighborhood. I don't want to say it's negative because I grew up in this neighborhood. I identify as a resident of this neighborhood, but we don't have the same access to equality as other people in Montreal might have. It's a safe first space where girls are accompanied throughout their teenage years, all the way to adulthood. We try to encourage them to reflect and develop critical skills, to create. We use artistic approaches. So I think that's about it. Thank you, Monica. I will now ask all the panelists to come back to turn their cameras on for a panel discussion. Here we are, everyone's back. Great. Thank you so much for your presentations. I know you did not have a lot of time to introduce the complex programs. I know those are very broad issues that you're speaking about. I appreciate your time and the details you gave us. The first question I'd like to ask you is the following. Could you tell us about the specific issues that the population you work with are facing. So I'm going to start with Maude. What are the specific issues of the population you work with? I'm going to let Selma, my colleague, speak. Thank you. Maude talked about this a little bit. It's all about biases. They are blind spots, important challenges, important barriers for persons with disabilities. There's a lack of resources, whether it be resources that can demonstrate the impact of sexual violences on them. We don't have access to the data, the researches, the studies to show them to the people in power and the decision makers. Maude, I'm going to let you speak of schools in terms of education, special education. What's the situation? I think it's very difficult. The workers have much more power on the persons with disabilities, or do they not have more power? Would you like to add something about that? I went to specialized schools in grade school and high school. I had no access to sexual education. The only training that I had was very basic. They were not even sure I was capable of receiving the training, while I was completely capable on the physical and mental level. I'm 20 years old. So the only training I received was I got a sanitary pad and they told me I was going to have a period. That's the only training I received. And in high school, I had no information, no access to a counselor or a specialized worker. It was very taboo. One thing I remember, in high school, the school I went to ended at 9 p.m. And the students, we were aged between 18 and 21. And there was a big debate around whether or not we could watch a movie about persons living with disabilities who wanted to experience a white trip and talk about sexuality. And that had caused a huge debates within the school board, with the teachers, the workers. We had to get our parents' authorization to watch this movie. And it was a movie that was aimed at raising awareness around sexuality and what was coming for us in our adult lives. We don't even have tools. We don't even have the tools, so that makes those persons potential victims. It increases their vulnerability. How can we envision safe relationships? How can we protect ourselves when we live with disabilities? It's very difficult, and we still see those situations nowadays. So we would really like to see change. We would like to see these people offered activities where they have a choice. They can decide from themselves. We don't want pornography to educate them on healthy relationships and egalitarian relationships. So those are some of the obstacles that we see. Even within organizations that work with the population in general, that work with youth, we would like to work with them much more to help them and give access to the tools. Thank you. I think it's a really important blind spot in most of the programs. Certainly throughout sexual education, people with disabilities are extremely underrepresented. And it's an issue that we must really tackle right now. Monica, would you like to speak of the issues that you see in Saint-Michel and that you see at the Maison d'Haïti? Yes. The neighborhood is quite isolated. So there's sort of so we have a small network, sort of an enclave. Culture is very important here. So a cultural approach would be important, and there's a lack of it. I think youth protection workers are trying to understand, other workers are trying to understand, but they lack sensitivity. Our neighborhood changed a lot. When I got there, it was Italian, and there was another community, and now it's the North African community that's very present. We might need more stability. I'm pretty sure it's one of the blind spots of the organizations. We don't have enough government help, and it's not stable. I don't know, Orlando, if you want to add anything. Yes, I'd like to add something to complement what you just said. The last portrait of the neighborhood that was made by the consultation table found that 49% of the inhabitants of Saint Michel are immigrants. In our project, I remember that I mentioned this during our first training about sexuality. It's one thing that we see is that there is a problem in terms of tools. We don't have the proper tools to work with the youth around sexuality. For example, I always give this example. It's not a magical wand that we need. When you want to, if you want to talk about sexuality with a person from Haiti, from Algeria, compared to a person who was born here in Quebec, and we also have young Quebecers who come to Maison d'Haïti, but we can't, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's really important to remember that. Also, poverty, exclusion, isolation, they all contribute to a really big problem that's at the heart of the issues connected to sexual violence, to peacekeeping in the neighborhood. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you very much, Orlando. And Ms. Sanka? Could you please just repeat the question for me? Yes. What are the specific issues of the community with which you work? So who do you work with at Head and Hands? Yeah, I think that one of the main issues that our community is faced with, the LGBTQ and trans community, sorry, I repeated LGBTQ and trans. Sorry about that. Just mentioned the whole alphabet. So the LGBTQ plus community is invisibilized by the services in place. Often people who work in schools are not, cannot meet the needs of the youth. They don't have the proper training and access to the proper information, and they often reproduce. What happens is that we live in a system in which heterosexual and cisgender voices are centered. The services are built accordingly to this model. Services are not adapted to a variety of people. Some people are not even seen by the schools. Sometimes services are offered. For example, if you are a victim of sexual violence, you can speak to a specialist or a counselor. But if LGBTQ plus youth try and access to those services, they don't receive proper support because the support workers are not capable of recognizing the specificities of the youth that come to see them. So it's in the way sexual education classes are taught. They are very much centered on the well-being of a heterosexual couple. So if, for example, a youth in the class is queer, they really don't recognize themselves in this model, and they don't necessarily have the trust to go and speak to someone about it. Homophobia is still extremely present in schools and society. So if you're a young person, you experience violence, you want to speak up about it, and you feel maybe a bit stuck in your situation, it can become a very difficult situation, because by speaking with a person who does not have an approach that's adapted to your reality, you don't want to stigmatize your community, but you still need help. So a lot of youth feel stuck in their situations. They don't have access to many options in terms of speaking out and reaching out to get support. So that's an important point. People are invisible, and they're more vulnerable to violence. They're confronted to homophobia, transphobia, and they don't feel supported by the systems in place that are supposed to support them. And I think all of this is really rooted in this invisibility and the lack of adaptability of the school systems. I'm going to open up the questions. The question to this: if you had a magic wand, if you had access to all youth workers or trainers who do sexual education to prevent sexual violences, recording your experience with your populations, what would be your message? What would you like to tell them? What would you ask them to include in their curriculum and in practices? Selma, would you like to start? Sure. If I had a magic wand, I would have more money to go and give them workshop. Each youth worker should stop being prejudiced, stop having biases, and see the person as a whole human being, see the person not as a heterosexual or queer person or a person with disabilities. All youth workers should just see the persons as they are. Often we use words like help, support, but no, that's not what we do. We accompany the persons. They are capable of doing it. Yes, they were taken out of institutions. 50 years ago, we told them that they could live their own lives, but now we must act upon this, and those persons go to school, high school, cégep, universities. Recently, with the frame law on sexual violences, offices were put up for students victims of sexual violences, but those offices were not accessible to students with disabilities in certain universities. How can you get concrete answers if you are not taken, if you're not considered in the designing of the solutions? So the persons themselves must tell us how they need to be accompanied. The persons, it's not the persons who need to adapt to our intervention. We need to adapt our intervention to them. That's what I would do with my magic wand.
So this completes what Selma has said. It's really about accompanying rather than doing things for the person. So what we want is support. It's not to get things done for us, whether it's to fill a form or to contact someone. We wish to do these things ourselves. Don't adapt. We often think of adaptation to adapt the tools, but it's not so much to adapt that, but it's just to make them inclusive, fully inclusive. So even if I live with lived experiences of disability, maybe I don't want the same thing as somebody else who also has lived experiences of disability. So the goal is the same, but don't forget the goal instead of refusing access to someone. I think what you're saying also is very important, because we have to think of people with lived experience of disability in the conception of tools, and not just to adapt them. Then it's to think of them from the start, not to say, oh, we have to include them afterwards. It has to be part of our thoughts from the start, so that our tools are inclusive. Absolutely. If we think of universal awareness, it's very broad, but if we think of using these tools so that everybody's included, then we'll really reach the entire population, as it means everybody, newcomers, persons with disabilities, all groups of persons. So if we think of, and so often if you take the time to think of people with lived experiences of disability, you'll end up thinking about everybody else. Orlando, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? If I had a magic wand, I would ask the government to put into place all the recommendations that the girls have asked for, particularly what they have asked for, and also to implement political engagement to prevent and fight sexual violence. I started my work here since 2014 at Maison d'Haïti, and we've done many activities, many workshops. We have collaborated with many people, and one of the things I've noticed, one of the problems, since we're in this context of diversity, and sexual diversity can be for social economic class, it can be for gender, it can be for many things. So the magic wand for me would be to make sure that there's a good intercultural approach that emphasizes empathy and listening. We have to listen, especially youth. We have to listen to them before doing anything. We have to hear people, and then we can see how we can act and see how we can influence people and help them to make sure that our boys don't become toxic men. We don't want that at all. Thank you, Orlando. Monica, would you like to speak of your wish if you had a magic wand? For the girls, I'd say to bring empowerment. That's what's very strange. I've lived in a family, but I find this again today. My magic one would be to find a magical solution. How is it that the mental workload is still existing and is still weighing on women? Why is it that there's still these frames around girls? I would love to have the answer, to be able to intervene, to find a solution, but with them. Ms. Sanka, if you could speak to the other, what would you recommend? I would say to make sure that you have tools that are strong and that are also intentional, really intentional, because there's many things in schools specifically, not just specifically in school, that also professionals would let slide. Oh, it's just a bad joke. No, we have to be very intentional in our approach, and also that very active, and to also seek to participate in deconstructing the system, the heterosexist system in which we're living right now, and to make sure that we really create a climate that is safe for youth that come from the diversity, for youth that are also asking themselves a lot of questions, and to have zero tolerance for things that might be queerphobic or transphobic. And I think it's important to be clear about inclusion of LGBTQT plus folks in the tools we offer and also in general in the services. Often with the people we work with, what we'll hear is the services are there, but young people don't go seek the services. I don't think it's enough to say young people don't seek those services. We need to ask why. Why aren't they seeking those services? And in the same frame of thought, we can't take for granted that we know the sexual identities or orientations of the youth we're working with. There's real possible ways to be inclusive in our work. I don't think it's as complicated as we might think. I think it's just we need to have a will, and we need to be intentional in how we do that. And also, we have to listen. We have to hear the voices of LGBTQ plus people, because there are people doing this work in queer communities that set up tools that say what should be done. And then there's just a question of wanting to intentionally listen those voices and try to center them. So I think that would be a blend of all of that. Thank you very much, Misanka. Thank you, everyone. It is now nearly 1:30. Thank you to our panelists for participating. Thank you to all our guests. Sorry, and I will remind us of the call to action we wrote at the beginning. What are the actions I wish to implement from this presentation? Michelle has put this into the chat. Click on the link to Slido and write what would be your call to action. What is the call to action you have chosen? And now I would invite Keitha to say the last word. Hello, everyone. I'm just here for a quick minute to say thank you so much to all our panelists and to our facilitator, our amazing facilitator, Jess, for facilitating these discussions today. There's always so much work to do, but it is very inspiring to see the great work that is being done. So thank you to everyone for coming. We will have other virtual sessions upcoming in March and in the future. So we will send you the information, and I hope everyone is in good health, and or at least as good in health as we can in these times. Thank you for being here, and have a happy Thursday.